You ever see something so small, so quiet, that it almost breaks your heart? Like watching someone who has been hurt so badly they don't even know how to ask for help anymore. Because that's exactly what happened on one freezing winter night, when three strangers on motorcycles pulled into a parking lot and witnessed something they'd never forget. The snow was coming down hard that evening. Not the pretty, gentle kind you see in movies. This was the bitter, cutting type that stings your face and makes you question why anyone would be outside at all. The streets were nearly empty. Just a few cars crawling through the white blanket, covering everything in sight. The wind howled between buildings, and most sensible people had already locked themselves inside their warm homes. But not everyone had that luxury. The door of a small neighborhood store creaked open, and out stepped someone who had no business being out in weather like this. A little girl, maybe 8 or 9 years old, wearing clothes that were too thin for the temperature. She was clutching a crumpled paper bag against her chest like it contained something precious. But what made people's hearts stop wasn't just her age or the weather. It was the way she moved. She had a wooden crutch under one arm, the kind that looked homemade and rough around the edges. Her leg was wrapped in what appeared to be torn strips of fabric, stained and dirty. Every single step she took made her face scrunched up in pain, though she was clearly trying her hardest not to show it. She'd bite her lip, pause, breathe, and then take another careful step forward into the storm. And she wasn't alone. Walking right beside her, matching her pace perfectly, was a German shepherd. Now, this wasn't some healthy, energetic dog bounding through the snow. This animal was limping just as badly as she was. His front leg had some kind of makeshift bandage wrapped around it, stained dark with what could only be blood. Despite his obvious pain, despite the freezing cold, despite everything, that dog stayed glued to her side. His eyes never left her, not for a second. It was like AD made some silent vow that nothing would happen to this girl on his watch, even if it killed him. The two of them moved together through the parking lot like wounded soldiers, retreating from a battlefield. Step. Pause. Step. Pause. Step. Pause. The snow gathered on the dog's thick fur, making him look almost ghostly in the dim light. His breath came out in short, painful puffs of white steam. But he didn't slow down. He didn't leave her side. Not even for a moment. Now, this wasn't a busy area. Most people had already rushed home hours ago. But right at that exact moment, 3 motorcycles rumbled into the parking lot, their engines cutting through the howling wind. The riders were all wearing heavy leather jackets, their faces weathered and serious. These weren't just weekend riders. These were men who'd lived hard lives, seen hard things, and carried themselves with the kind of quiet confidence that comes from surviving more than most people ever face. The lead rider. A tall man with gray streaking through his dark hair and lines around his eyes that told 1,000 stories, shut off his engine. That's when he saw them. At first, he thought his eyes were playing tricks on him. But no. There they were, a tiny girl and an injured dog, struggling through a snowstorm like they were fighting for their lives. His expression changed instantly. Confusion. Then, concern. Then something else. Something that looked a lot like recognition. Without thinking, he dismounted and started walking toward them. His 2 companions noticed immediately and followed his gaze, their own faces registering the same shock. The little girl noticed them approaching, and the fear that flashed across her face was instant and absolute. She tried to move faster, to get away, but her injured leg just couldn't support her panic. Her foot slipped on the icy ground, and suddenly she was falling forward. The paper bag went flying, its contents spilling out and rolling across the snow. Bandages, antiseptic, a small bottle of pain medication. Before she could hit the ground, the dog threw himself under her, bracing his body against hers despite his own injury. The pain must have been incredible, but he didn't make a sound. He just absorbed her weight, keeping her upright through sheer willpower and love. The lead biker stopped dead in his tracks. He held up both hands slowly, palms out, in the universal gesture of peace. His voice, when he spoke, was gentle, careful, like he was trying not to spook a wounded animal. "Hey there. It's okay. Nobody's going to hurt you." The girl pressed herself against the dog, her eyes wide and red from cold and crying. Her whole body was shaking, and it wasn't just from the temperature. "We don't need help," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I just need to get home. Max needs to rest." She glanced down at the dog, her loyal companion, who was struggling to keep himself standing despite everything. You could see it in his eyes. The pain, the exhaustion, but also the determination. He would protect this girl, even if it destroyed him. One of the other bikers, a shorter man with kind eyes, crouched down several feet away. He made sure to keep his distance, not wanting to scare her further. "Sweetheart, what happened to you too?" Silence. The girl just stood there, trembling. Then her face crumpled, and tears started streaming down her cheeks, freezing almost instantly in the brutal cold. "It was my dad," she whispered. Those 4 words hung in the air like a knife. The 3 men went completely still. The temperature seemed to drop another 10 degrees, but it had nothing to do with the weather. She continued, her voice breaking apart with every word. "Last night, her father had come home in one of his moods. Angry, unpredictable, violent. When Max tried to step between them, to protect her like he always did, her father grabbed a shovel and struck the dog across his leg. The crack of bone, the yelp of pain. And when she screamed and tried to pull Max away, her father turned on her too. He kicked her injured leg, the same leg that had been hurt weeks ago and never properly healed because they couldn't afford a doctor. She waited until he finally passed out on the couch, reeking of alcohol and rage. Then she climbed out through a broken window in her bedroom, the one he'd never bothered to fix. She helped Max through it too, both of them biting back screams of pain. And with the few dollars she'd hidden away in an old shoebox, money saved from returning cans and bottles, she walked to this store to buy bandages to try and save the only friend she had in this world. The lead biker's jaw tightened so hard you could hear his teeth grinding. His companions looked equally furious, but they kept their voices calm. For her sake, he moved slowly, carefully, and knelt down beside Max. The dog watched him warily, but didn't growl. The man extended his hand, letting Max sniff it, taking his time to earn the animal's trust. "You're a good boy," Said softly. "You protected her when no one else would. That makes you a hero, you know that?" Max's tail gave the tiniest wag, just once. It was all he had the strength for. The man looked up at the girl. "What's your name?" She hesitated. Then, in a voice so small it almost disappeared into the wind,
"Amy! Amy! I'm Marcus."
"These are my brothers, Jake and Tommy. We ride together, and we belong to a group called the Iron Guardians. You know what we do?" She shook her head, still not trusting them completely. "We protect people who can't protect themselves. Kids, families, anyone who needs someone in their corner. And right now, Amy, you need someone in your corner. You and Max both." Amy's eyes filled with fresh tears. "Nobody helps us. Nobody ever helps." Marcus shook his head firmly. "That ends tonight. You hear me? Tonight, it ends." He started gathering up her scattered supplies from the snow, placing them carefully back in the bag. Then, before she could protest, he gently scooped Max up into his arms. Eamon gasped, terrified he might hurt her dog, but Marcus just adjusted his grip carefully, supporting Max's injured leg with practiced ease. "This guy needs real medical attention, not bandages from a store. A real vet, and you need to get out of this cold before you get pneumonia. We're taking you both with us." "I don't have money for a vet," Amy said desperately. "I can't pay you back." "Did I ask for money? Did you hear me say anything about payment?" Marcus looked at her seriously. "This is what family does, Amy. And as of right now, your family." They wrapped her in a huge leather jacket that swallowed her small frame. Jake lifted her carefully onto his motorcycle, making sure she was secure and warm. Marcus held Max gently across his lap as he mounted his own bike. They started their engines, but kept their speed low, riding carefully through the storm toward their clubhouse on the edge of town. The clubhouse was nothing fancy, just an old converted garage with worn furniture and motorcycle parts scattered around. But when they brought Amy inside, it suddenly felt like the warmest place on earth. Tommy immediately started a fire in the old wood stove. Jake brought out blankets, thick and clean. Someone heated up soup. Another guy dug through their first aid kit for better supplies. When they unwrapped Max's bandage, even these tough, experienced men flinched. The wound was deep. Infected, angry red lines spreading outward. This dog had been suffering for hours, maybe even a full day, and hadn't made a single sound of complaint. "We're going to the emergency vet right now," Marcus said, his voice leaving no room for argument. "And Amy, I don't want to hear a word about money. This is happening." Her lip trembled. "Why would you do this for us? You don't even know us." Marcus knelt down in front of her, his weathered face suddenly looking much younger, much more vulnerable. "When I was about your age, I was in a bad situation too. Really bad, and someone saved me. A stranger who didn't have to care, but did anyway. I made a promise that day that if I ever got the chance, I'd do the same for someone else. Today, Amy, you're that someone." At the veterinary emergency clinic, they rushed Max into surgery immediately. The vet explained that the infection was serious but treatable. Max would need antibiotics, pain medication, and weeks of recovery. But he was strong. He was a fighter. He was going to survive. Amy sat in the waiting room, wrapped in blankets, holding a cup of hot chocolate she wasn't drinking. Marcus sat beside her while Jake and Tommy made phone calls. They went calling random numbers. They were calling contacts, people they knew in law enforcement, social workers they'd worked with before, because Amy wasn't going back to that house. Not ever. When the vet finally came out and said Max had made it through surgery beautifully, Amy burst into tears. But this time they were different tears. Relief, gratitude, hope. Over the next few hours, things moved quickly. A police report was filed. Photographs were taken of Amy's injuries and Max's wound. Child Protective Services was contacted. Marcus and his brothers had done this before. They knew how the system worked, and they knew how to work it properly. "What's going to happen to me?" Amy asked, her voice small and scared again. Marcus sat down beside her, resting a gentle hand on her shoulder. "You're going to stay with us. Not just tonight. For real. We've got connections, Amy. People who trust us. We'll get you into a safe home, maybe even with one of our families if you want. You're not going back to him, and you're not going to be alone anymore. Ever." Amy looked at him with disbelief shining in her eyes. "You mean it? I've never meant anything more in my entire life." She threw her arms around him and sobbed. Big, heaving sobs that came from somewhere deep inside. All the fear, all the pain, all the loneliness she'd been carrying for years came pouring out, and Marcus just held her, letting her cry it out, while his brothers stood nearby with their own eyes glistening. When Max was finally released, a few hours later, still groggy from anesthesia, but with his leg properly treated and bandaged, Amy buried her face in his fur and whispered promises that they'd never be hurt again. Max's tail wagged slowly, as if he understood every word. The days that followed changed everything. The Iron Guardians became Amy's family in every way that mattered. Marcus and his wife officially became her foster parents, while the legal process moved forward. Max recovered fully, his limp disappearing with proper treatment and care, and Amy started to smile. Really smile. The kind of smile that reaches your eyes and doesn't fade the second you think no one is looking. She went to school, made friends, learned what it felt like to come home without fear, to sleep without listening for footsteps in the hallway, to be a kid. And every single night, Max slept at the foot of her bed, standing guard, always on duty, because some bonds aren't just about loyalty. They're about survival, about love in its purest, most selfless form. So here's what I want you to think about. How many Amys are out there right now? How many kids are walking through storms, literally and figuratively, with no one to notice? How many are suffering in silence because they've learned that no one will help? And more importantly, what are you going to do about it? You might not be able to save everyone, but maybe you can save someone. Maybe you'll notice the quiet kid who always seems a little too scared. Maybe you'll be the person who asks questions when something doesn't feel right. Maybe you will be the stranger who decides to care when it would be so much easier to just keep walking. Because that's what heroes really look like, not people with superpowers. Just regular folks who see someone hurting and decide to do something about it. If this story moved you, if it made you feel something real, then take 2 seconds and hit that like button. Drop a comment telling me what you think, and subscribe because we share stories like this every single week. Stories about real courage, real kindness, real hope. And remember, you might be someone's Marcus. Today, all you have to do is pay attention.